Welcome back, boss, to Intruder, Hideo Kojima, Metal Gear, and the Medium. Tonight, we turn to what may be the least favorite among diehard fans of Hideo Kojima's spy action saga, MGS4, Guns of the Patriots, released in 2008. Let's take a look. – 2005, Tokyo, Japan. With the launch of Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, the PS2 era for Metal Gear draws to a close. And a new era dawns as a game studio forms named Kojima Productions, Kojipro for short. Under the banner of Kojima Productions, titles can, in theory, retain their necessary Kojima-ness without the man himself having to take the lead every single time. Following the non-Kojima PSP card games Metal Gear Acid 1 and 2 in 2004 and 5, a new entry is designed to capitalize on MGS3's success and expand the franchise beyond Hideo Kojima games, not to mention sell PSPs. This game will be called Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops. Though Kojima helps build the fundamental design ideas in broad strokes, the result in 2006, followed by an online-centric expansion version, Portable Ops Plus in 2007, are the first time that a story-driven Metal Gear title with serious relevance to the wider saga is produced without Kojima's direction, even if still a project of Kojima Productions. It finally seems the time has come for a non-Hideo Kojima mainline Metal Gear game. The plan is for Shuyo Murata, co-writer of MGS3 and director of Zone of the Enders: The Second Runner, to direct. The title, Metal Gear Solid 4. Just before Kojipro's formation and the release of Subsistence came 2004's Boktai 2 Solar Boy Django. but neither Boktai titles for the Game Boy Advance sell well in the West. In 2005's Boktai 3 Sabata's Counterattack is the first Japanese exclusive Kojima-centric game since maybe the late 90s, early 2000s Tokimeki Memorial Drama Series Volumes 1 through 3. The fourth Boktai game, Lunar Nights, in 2006, will represent a complete series reboot, now without the expensive proprietary solar sensor. But this reflects a similar shift, as we'll see, as evinced by the coming disaster of Sony's E3 conference of 2006. By the latter 2000s, it's almost like the prior 2 decades plus of Japanese dominance over the games industry never happened. Xbox Live and the Xbox 360's coming synonymousness with the console first-person shooter genre has ushered in an American-dominated era, whereby video games are becoming, arguably, just another product bearing down the capitalist conveyor belt. In that new paradigm, much as during the Atari reign over the industry prior to its crash in 1983, the operative phrase becomes rinse and repeat. Franchises like Medal of Honor and Battlefield rarely change much across games beyond their shifting surface-level military settings. Story, alongside use of the gaming medium to do anything really vital or new, is typically in these US-born titles secondary, if not irrelevant. These are, in a much more literal sense than ever before, computer-generated games. These FPS titles are distinguished primarily by graphics, dictated all but entirely by the raw power of technology alone. Very little about these game wars without end resemble anything particularly human, or especially sentient. In these endless battle zones, players don't look for any reason to fight. In the spectacle of modern warfare's complete absence of substance, war in all its grand emptiness becomes its own raison d'etre, own reason to exist, an endless virtual war for its own sake. Between 2005 and 2008, these type of games come to dominate the global gaming marketplace, right alongside a different, relatively recent Western invention, the massively multiplayer online game, or MMO. Together, the FPS and MMO genres are precipitating a sea change in the gaming, both industry and medium, that is nothing short of cataclysmic.
This isn't a race, it's just plain killing. Violence isn't a sport.
Yes, the world by 2008 will be drowning in military action games. Arguably the very genre the original MGS helped to commodify. A sense of sin and regret will go on haunting Kojima's signature series for this right to the very end.
It's me, Snake. Snake, it's me.
Otacon.
Sorry to keep you waiting, Snake. Allow me to introduce Metal Gear Mark II.
Metal Gear.
That's right.
MGS4 is being made at a somewhat bittersweet, if not downright sad time, professionally speaking, for Hideo Kojima. As we began to discover last episode, Kojima's entered something resembling suspended animation or arrested development. Without securing his signature series with a viable future, either voluntarily or under orders from Konami, Kojima can't move on.
Self-sacrifice. Because that was her duty.
The fate that led him with Metal Gear to such global success, it seems, has become, by MGS4, a set of chains.
It's time we were both free.
The Boktai games, for all their sunny brilliance, just haven't taken off. Neither is Zone of the Enders successful enough for a third game, and reportedly, Kojima will place the blame for all these various other team projects' failures squarely on himself. And other than the somewhat novelty card games on the PSP, Metal Gear Acid, the only non-Kojima Metal Gear game to debut without him directing, as mentioned, Portable Ops, just isn't anywhere up to snuff. Not at any rate, where it arguably matters most. Portable Ops on a systems level actually was designed by Kojima. Much like Boktai, the game's designed only as a portable title could be. In Portable Ops' case, this means tapping into the PSP's Wi-Fi and GPS, so that physically moving around and taking your PSP along could feed into gameplay. But the game's story, penned by novelist Gakuto Mikumo, feels a pale imitation, a pastiche of Kojima's style. And more importantly, it simply fails to sync up with the gameplay anywhere as well. One constant of a Hideo Kojima game is that even though Kojima isn't a programmer, he serves as, at the very least, head writer, head game designer, and main director. By 2005 to early 2006, what's becoming increasingly hard to ignore is likely the only setup that, for Metal Gear to truly feel like Metal Gear, could ever work. The writer and designer and director being one person. All this spells out something kind of horrible for Hideo. If he ever leaves this series, it seems that its soul will depart with him. A relationship that began as symbiotic, you might say, gradually becoming parasitic. Kojima, since at least Metal Gear Solid 2, has wanted to pass the torch as Metal Gear's architect on to the next generation. But sadly, by the start of MGS4's development, more and more, that doesn't seem like it's ever gonna happen. Kojima, the world-weary veteran, will have to return to the proverbial battlefield for one more mission. But this one, Kojima resolves, really will be his last. If Metal Gear won't let him go before he dies, And if there's no one else suitable left to replace him, then there's really just one way out. One way when there's nowhere to run, no place for Hideo to hide. That way out, that liberation from the series, if you will, the system that Kojima himself helped create, is to now help dismantle it. MGS4, as devised starting in 2005, will not only be Kojima's final Metal Gear, it will be Solid Snake's last Metal Gear as well, the original series protagonist, and Kojima's first protagonist as chief game designer back in 1987. Snake, that beloved icon all over the world, who many feel they grew up with, whose growth has so closely corresponded with the medium itself. That Snake in MGS4 will have to die. But he won't die in vain.
Snake, 聞こえるか?
小島監督は年老いても戦い続けるスネークに自らの姿を重ね合わせていた。
スタッフにやっぱり10年間一緒にやってきてるんで、ゲームの作り方、メタルの作り方をずっと教えてきたんですよ。そういうこともあって、やっぱり伝えていかなあかんこともあるんですけど、伝わらないこともあるんじゃないかっていうのが今回のテーマで、伝えられないものがセンス、最後に残った人の意志とか生き様とか、そういったものの代表が年老いてもなおかつ戦い続けるスネークであり僕であるっていう。
Am I going to die? Everyone dies. No. We started this. And it's our duty to finish it.
Guns of the Patriots takes place 5 years after the events of MGS2, 9 after MGS1, and 50 after MGS3. As a rapidly aging Solid Snake tracks down answers behind his sudden transformation, he gets roped into one last mission. One that brings Old Snake, the terminally ill former hero, all around the world to atone for his sins. To take responsibility for all his prior messes and unfinished business. And in the process, Snake determines the fate not only of America, but the entire world.
Failure will spell doom for the human race. You've got to stop them from using that railgun. Then annihilate GW.
He breaks the series' every last cycle, smashes them apart right down to the gears, and in so doing, the player's not playing through just another sequel. You're working to purposefully bring the entire series into the quick eternity of annihilation. Up against Snake are the Sons of the Patriots system on the one hand, an advanced total battlefield and information control grid spanning the globe, as well as the private forces under the system's both banner and control. Not to mention, above them, the so-called war economy that's transformed no less radically than Snake's visage or into a new kind of business.
I know what you're thinking, but Drebin does have a point. The world depends on war, on the war economy. Can you imagine what would happen if war just disappeared overnight?
Snake, what we call peace is an equilibrium kept in check by the war economy. Destroying the system means wiping out the information society, the end of modern civilization. Like it or not, we may have no choice but to protract the system.
That's only one side of the brewing world war in MGS4. On the other side, we have an assemblage of old foes, led by the mysterious and mercurial liquid Ocelot, who, alongside his technogenetically enhanced private army of super soldiers and their even more super elite top unit, Snakehound, aka the Beauty and Beast Corps, plot a coup d'etat against the so-called Patriot AI overlords and their system by seizing control of it from within. To stop Liquid, save the world, and ultimately cleanse it even of the Patriots by the end, Snake teams up with his own cadre of former friends, as well as enlisting the strictly business services of a new contact, neither enemy nor friend, the gun launderer, alias Drebin 893. MGS4's high-techno dystopian neo-cyberpunk remains singular among science fiction. As you might have guessed from the name of the game, guns in Guns of the Patriots are kind of a big deal. Each one has different stats, a different feel to it. MGS4, more than ever before, is a type of military simulation, though these action-oriented focal points and sim elements concealed RPG roots. As well as good old-fashioned tactical espionage action. would also encounter through that terminally ill protagonist, now no solid, but simply old Snake, a perfect metaphor for the rapid aging properties of the medium itself, which had made legends like Snake, not to mention Hideo Kojima, into relics overnight. But it would be more than Snake that MGS4 would present as on death's door. Through Snake and his techno-mediated adventures gadgets like the nifty Solid Eye, we will see a world of the near future no less than he is on the brink of death. Put more accurately, MGS4's world will, deriving from the ideas behind Kojima Productions' Game Boy Advance title Boktai, present a world in which all its borders have dissolved and all hard distinctions, more or less, erased, including even the most vital distinction, the one dividing life from death, and today from yesterday and tomorrow.
In a place not too far from here and now, the end of the world approaches.
In this brain-dead husk of a world in which we can never truly live or die, instead of Boktai's fantastical vampires and zombies, we'll see zombified masses and vampiric AI masters who utilize sci-fi biotechnology and microengineering, most prominent of which being, of course, the game's soon-to-be most infamous element, nanomachines. Meme-armed fans would soon take to mocking MGS4's nanomachines and what they would see as an over-reliance on them as a plot MacGuffin. It had been Hitchcock himself who gave the best definition, maybe, for this cinema-specific word. The MacGuffin, in his words, is the thing in a movie that the spies are after, but the audience doesn't particularly care about. The memes belied the reality that nanomachines had become an ever greater focus in Kojima's sci-fi titles, going back all the way to Snatcher. For MGS4, nanomachines may have been a MacGuffin, but as a plot element, they substantiate the themes of invisibility, and for lack of a better word, mind control, the new neo-totalitarian domain over our innermost, most secret senses.
None of the tests were able to pinpoint the cause.
So,
Well, judging by how rapidly the aging has progressed, I'd say...
a year at best, right?
Yeah.
This change from Solid Snake to Old Snake likely also derived from Kojima's experiences humanizing his signature character to better fit the new gaming era, transformed from the clone Solid Snake into, with MGS3, his more human analog, the original Snake, Big Boss. Old Snake is even more of a reinvention of this character, as David Hayter and Akio Otsuka both were now forced to modulate Snake, become someone, something that we scarcely recognized and never thought we'd see.
Oh my god. Snake.
All right, let's just get this over with.
Yes.
Someone frail and helpless. It was a fascinating development for this character, as much for story and gameplay, as we'll see in particular when we get to the section of the game set on Shadow Moses. Much more like Snatcher and Police Knots, MGS4 would play out across several different acts, each one of them explicitly bookmarked. But the central mechanics and controls have greatly changed as well. The biggest example has to be the psych meter, instead of MGS3's stamina. If that game was the body, this one's the soul. Introducing for the first quantifiable time, psychological warfare.
Snake, Meryl's not herself. Don't use your weapon.
It's Psycho Mantis. He's controlling Meryl. That tune is his mind control music.
Snake can now mess with the enemy's minds and manipulate through things like propaganda their emotions. Yet at the same time, we have to contend with things like stress, which negatively affects your psych meter, both of which active barometers as to changing real-time conditions in the field. In prior MGSs, a primitive form of this idea meant that codec calls would change to reflect your current status or location, or maybe your relationship with the person you're calling in dynamic ways. But the psych meter idea in MGS4 really dwarves all its ancestors by comparison.
A guy named Solid Snake. But from where I'm sitting, Old Snake seems a little more appropriate.
Old, huh?
As a result of things like the psych meter, Old Snake has a sensitivity, a light on inside, that prior Snakes lacked. This applies not only to his more nuanced facial expressions, but also to his sense of presence psychologically during gameplay, which ebbs and flows with the tides of war throughout the game. Level layouts in MGS4 are now much larger with lots of different ways forward, each one of them resembling the toy box that this sim-adjacent series, flirting more and more since MGS2 Substance as it has with sandbox elements, has gradually aspired to be. Apart from these larger levels, though, things got complex in other ways as well. For example, in MGS4, characters could now lose or break arms and burn their faces. They could have bionic arms, like Drebins or Ocelots. Huge battles were now depictable on a scale they'd never been, up to full-size sea, air, and land engagements, like some sort of sci-fi dystopian near-future reprise of World War II. A large variety of new scenarios was now possible as well, from fighting off zombies and robots during another Great Escape, to Cold War-style, smoky, noir espionage behind the former Iron Curtain. Along the way, Snake must battle a series of, echoing the AI from MGS2,
our beloved monsters.
each more stunning and shell-shocked than the last. By the end of the game, we would be fighting a revolutionary blend of organic and machine enemies. Whether talking about the B&B core, the genetically enhanced frogs unit, or the gecko machines, all of this was now only possible thanks to the PS3. But the other major basic features of MGS4 are the inclusion of economics, scenarios with group dynamics between and among AIs, and the major emphasis not only on secret mechanics, but more broadly on replayability, taking things perhaps all the way back to Kojima's roots, the arcade. MGS4 doesn't really begin, you see, until after you've beaten it the first time, and its secrets are so virtually omnipresent that it's almost reaching the point this espionage conspiracy thriller saga will never be game over. MGS4 may have more mechanics, details, and Easter eggs hidden than there are players to find them all. With all this in mind, let's now look at this game a little bit more closely. Kojima sees MGS4 as an exclusive, big banner entry for Sony's next games console, still, as of 2005, under development, the PlayStation 3. By matching that upcoming machine's cutting-edge technology with his own team's savvy, outside-the-box computer engineering, Kojima's MGS4 will be a new kind of military action game, a new kind of Metal Gear, and a totally singular spin on the genre of dystopian science fiction. But it will be here, with the concept of dystopian sci-fi, that MGS4's story, gameplay, and design will each converge. Each will play off the same unifying subject, 21st century society and technology. MGS4 will attempt being the ultimate game not only to end the Metal Gear saga, but to epitomize life in its present age. Frozen, Beauty and the Beast style, as it remains in the opioid-like winter purgatory of our state, neither content nor discontent, that state-of-the-art age of American hegemonic, neoconservative neoliberalism. The age of the borderless state, the epoch then known as the so-called global war on terror. In this new century and new war, the industrial age paradigm of nation-states is giving way, however gradually, to the post-industrial 21st century paradigm of borderless economics. New technologies are proliferating, and ironically, the doctrine of creating a cleaner, safer battlefield has cleared the way for so-called low-intensity conflicts and private forces the world over. Tragically, because they are low intensity and localized, these conflicts' fires can keep on burning indefinitely. With MGS4, Kojima greatly wants to comment on this growing state of affairs, and on other related shifts too, having taken place in the 4 years since Metal Gear Solid 2, the last time he got a chance to comment on modern society directly. But there's just one problem. For all its timely ambitions, conceptual profundity, and coming technical achievements, MGS4 as a project, strictly speaking, never should have existed to begin with. No MGS games before now were written to set up sequels. With each new entry in the saga, Kojima has had to retcon, or as we called it last time, rettext, elements from prior games. Subsequently, the wider saga, unlike the tightly woven narratives from each individual game, has been shaped largely without much of a guiding plan, led instead by contingencies imposed by each new Metal Gear release. None of the saga's many lingering mysteries and half-revealed bits of lore were ever meant to result in conclusive, exhaustive explanation, some big payoff down the road. Yet MGS4 will be meant as just that. Perhaps to liberate the series from its own originator, to unfreeze time Beauty and the Beast style for the first time since MGS1 debuted back in 1998.
Now I'll show you the power of the weapon that will lead us in the 21st century.
Tying up every loose strand with missing links to unite the entire series as one story, this impossible goal Koji Pro tackles perhaps as a way not only of liberating Kojima from the series, but also as a way of thanking fans for their years and years of support. Yet MGS4 will also warn the player of over-sentimentalizing yesterday, or getting wrapped up in any genuine sense of self for ourselves that doesn't derive from within. Metal Gear Solid 4 was ambitious to say the least. While every entry prior had followed a single series of events, this game's scope was more global, and its core gameplay loop became much more open-ended. But here's where MGS4 would be the most misunderstood entry in the series yet. For this game, Hideo Kojima pioneered a new kind of storytelling in medium-specific ways. Now, much more than ever, storytelling became a function of game design, and game design influenced, in turn, the framing of the actual story. As a result, MGS4's entire atmosphere, up to and including its core game design, remains positively saturated with the wider story and themes. Kojima has tackled the task of fusing together digitally dissimilar elements. What are those elements? No, it's not story and gameplay or movie and game. This time, MGS's attempted fusion will be the one between fan expectations for more of the same,
a surveillance camera,
and its creator's vision for something different.
A surveillance camera.
The meaning in the system may have changed, but the battlefield hasn't. Until that point, war was like a game to them. And then suddenly, reality came crashing down.
I doubt that in a conflict of this type there's ever been the degree of free press coverage as you are witnessing in this instance.
The first public showings of MGS4 are in 2005, chiefly at E3 and the Tokyo Game Show.
I think what we're most looking forward to creating in a PlayStation 3 game is a truly realized, truly immersive, living, breathing world. This is what we live for. With Cell and with PlayStation 3, we feel very excited and very confident that we're going to be able to absolutely push the limits of what can be created and the experiences that we can immerse our audience in.
MGS4 at E3 2005 sits alongside some truly incredible looking upcoming titles. Games like Red Dead Redemption, and evidently an imminent PS3 remake of the much beloved Final Fantasy VII.
絵とサウンドは当然綺麗になってハリウッドの、CG レベルのものがリアルタイムで動くというのはまずそれは必ずなると思いますね。そこからが僕らのやっぱり、喜びとか腕の見せ所なんですけども、プレイステーション3に向けてですね、今どこ考えてるのは、見えない世界を、見えないところに力を注ぐという、そういうことをまず考えているんですよ。送り手としてはそういうのを考えながら、作るべきだと思いますし、そういう作れる環境がようやく手に入るのかなというふうには思います。
But apart from a brief aside made by Kojima about the PS3, the trailer version of MGS4 featured at the C3 is no version at all. Much as every MGS before it, the game's announced using prototype, or in this case, straight up old assets, unrepresentative of the actual project now under development. The game will be directed not by Shuyo Murata or Hideo Kojima, but the two of them together. But the true face of Guns of the Patriots is not unveiled until the Tokyo Game Show this same year, also 2005. Utilizing yet another coyly subversive trailer, as by now had become a series tradition, here Kojima disguised MGS4 as just another FPS game. And it wouldn't be the last time that he would don disguises to introduce a game. Nor would it even be the last such deception surrounding MGS4. For April Fool's Day 2008, in the middle of a highly technical breakdown for MGS4 by Soft Image XSI, there will come false news of an upcoming collaboration with Ubisoft's popular Metal Gear knockoff Assassin's Creed, supposedly titled Assassin's Solid. In reality, what this really presaged was the inclusion of that game's signature assassin outfit in MGS4. This TGS 2005 deceptive trailer's emphasis on the FPS genre and how it plays off the acronym FPS signals that, like its forebears, MGS4 will comment on the wider state of the medium in fourth wall breaking ways, once again by fusing together story and gameplay. But as Kojima at the Sony E3 event of 2005 had hinted, MGS4 won't be satirizing FPS games or doing much else either in ways that will prove easy to spot.
ところでオタコ、セルプロセッサーってなんだ？
コンピューターアーキテクチャに革命をもたらした高性能マルチコアチップだよ。軍事にも利用されてる。
そんなものが戦場に必要なのか？
あ、プラットフォーム戦争に勝つためにはね。
このメタルでか？
それはこれから僕たちが証明するんだよ。スネーク、この先僕らはどこまで行くのかな。楽しみだ。
Every Metal Gear project since 1990 had involved some form of training or instruction on real weapons and military techniques. But with MGS4, not only did longtime advisor Motosato Mori return to cheerfully flip Koji Pro developers on their asses, given the crucial importance for the coming game of firearms, and not just solo but also now group unit combat, longtime series military advisor Motosato Mori takes the team off into the wild for some live field exercises, led by Kojima himself at Mori's guidance and supervision. Then come the series of research trips for the game. These will allow MGS4 to achieve an unprecedented level of hyper-realism by combining on-site location shooting with new frontiers in asset modeling to bring the series-wide concept of digital fusion into the future. Now, not only will MGS's digital fusion refer to unifying story and gameplay with real-time 3D, MGS4's pseudo-photorealism will also combine much more than ever before reality and the pseudo-reality of computer simulations. To quote The Making of MGS4 by Yoshiyuki Watanabe, quote, "In March 2006, the team went to Morocco, in April to Peru, and in June, Prague in the Czech Republic," end quote. Illustrating the importance that pseudo-photorealism would have for MGS4, quote, "The team took over 35,000 photographs," end quote. But it's in terms of those invisible features and design ideas that Kojima had mentioned in 2005, MGS4 will prove to be such a serious challenge. Game worlds have now grown so large, no single player will likely see all that they have to offer. That makes the essential job of the game designers as storytellers exponentially more difficult, because now their fundamental goal of directing the player's attention has been undermined by their very own game. There's no telling whether what the creator has in mind will necessarily shine through the other side of the dev pipeline process, let alone do so in a way that is consistent across playthroughs. accounting for all the differences in those playthroughs.
アイコンをゲットした表示を出して、新しいアイテムがありますよっていうことを知らせるのと、あとはちょっとブリーフィングっていう基本の操作がこのように図解で出る、トリセツみたいなものですけど、ここにも入れようかなと思ってますが、データを追加するのでこの時期結構厳しいんですけど、ちょっと入れたいと思います。で入れてみてどうなのかっていうのを今後またモニターとかでチェックすると、そういう繰り返し、根気のいるでも楽しいという時期です。
Even for a game intentionally designed around secret mechanics, much of the content in MGS4 will be missed entirely by most of the players playing it.
Otacon! She seems to know exactly where I am, even in this damn whiteout. What the hell is going on?
Infrared, maybe? No, you're wearing octocamera. It wouldn't be able to read you. Snake, do you see a pattern in her attacks? Anything that gives you a hint?
Right. Now that I think about it, her attacks have been coming from downwind.
Which means?
Damn! She can smell me.
Amazing! Tracking you in this wind, just by your scent?
A St. Bernard can find and rescue a lost hiker in the middle of a blizzard in the Alps. If that beast has no olfactory sensors keen as a dog's, it's not out of the question.
Then what do? Octocamo doesn't do anything to mask your scent.
All I can do is try and guess where that thing's going to be. Try to move downwind.
Can you do it?
Either I do, or I don't.
Okay then. Good luck, Snake.
Jonathan.
Ed.
You and me, we were great partners.
No. Great friends.
Jonathan! Jonathan! 俺たちはいいパートナーだったよな。ああ、最高の友達さ。
As Kojima says, the central design concept animating the next MGS game will be one of secret mechanics, and emphasizing the nuances behind the naked eye of things like human psychology, not only of the physical objective world, but of sensed, lived experience. The life inside. The E3 trailer of 2005 had used assets from MGS3 back on the PS2. But the trailer for TGS was made using, quote, the real-time processing power of the PS3. To transfer this to the actual game without losing quality, it took a lot of effort for the team to import the data and create a proper balance. In the initial stages of the project, they were still getting used to the performance of the PS3, and there were no precedents to any of the work they were doing. The data size required for the content was much bigger than anything that had come before. End quote. The case study of Metal Gear Solid 4. (2006). The reveal of the PS3 by Sony at E3 is a disaster. This year's E3 showing of theirs will go down in history, in fact, as one of the most notorious ever. The console's extremely high price point and relatively poorly arranged sales pitch, few watching understood, or much cared about. But what the wider Sony fiasco obfuscated was the first true glimpse at Metal Gear Solid 4, albeit a version of the game that was still clearly very much in development. This unbelievable and emotive trailer was incredibly striking. It was a fitting prelude to the emotional, dark, and gripping game that would follow it.
"だが、俺にはまだやらなければならないことが残っている。戦争は変わった。国家や思想のためではない。利益や民族のためでもない。金で雇われた傭兵部隊と作られた無人兵器が果てしない代理戦争を繰り返す。命を消費する戦争は合理的な痛みのないビジネスへと変貌した。戦争は変わった。ID 登録された兵士たちは ID 登録された武器を持ち ID 登録された兵器を使う。体内のナノマシンが彼らの能力を助長し管理する。遺伝子の制御、情報の制御、感情の制御、戦場の制御、全ては監視され統制されている。戦争は変わった。時代は抑止から制御へと移行し、大量破壊兵器によるカタストロフは回避された。そして戦場の制御は歴史のコントロールをも可能にした。戦争は変わった。戦場が制御管理された時、戦争は不変のものとなった。
罪を未来に残してはいけない。
世界を救えるのは君たちしかいない。
私たちは新生フォックスハウンドよ。
全ての罰を僕らが受けるべきだ。スネーク、今度は俺が守る。
アベル殺しでイブに追放されたのはお前の方だ。戦争は変わった。だが俺にはまだやらなければならないことが残っている。
One last punishment I must endure. Erase my genes. Wipe this meme from the face of the earth. This is my final mission.
世の中には語り伝えられないものがある。伝えてはいけないことがある。紡いではいけない命がある。
The same company that seemed to take the world by storm with the PlayStation and PlayStation 2 had now become a laughingstock. This marked a major shift in the balance of power within the games industry. The Japanese industry seems on track to break away from Western markets all but entirely. Instead focusing on the increasingly lucrative mobile and handheld markets within Asia. It's around now that certain analysts start making grave predictions for the longevity of everything Kojima, who by the 2008 release of MGS4 will be 45, has given his entire life helping build, namely the single-player home console game. Konami have already begun to transition into gambling game machines, and in particular the pachinko market, starting in 2005. For all intents and purposes, the coming MGS4, for all Koji Pro, or for that matter anyone else can guess, might not only be the final Metal Gear Solid, but the last big banner Japanese action title, period. Fortunately, in retrospect, things were not actually all that dire. In 2007, a company named Platinum Games would form, thereby ensuring that Japanese action blockbusters still had a future. Koji Pro would use a third-party software suite for the game's handcrafted facial animations, rigging, and so on, then known as Soft Image XSI.
The story of Softimage is the story of a 3D software that did not find a home except in the hearts of the artists who used it over the decades to create amazing pieces of artwork. Softimage was a genius 3D program that was ahead of its time. At one point of its life cycle, it reached new heights and became the #1 3D package in the 90s, and despite its limited toolset, it was super fast to use with a highly intuitive UI. Softimage was able to get things done quickly, and clients loved it, leaving the industry at large trying to integrate its features into their own products. Softimage was used by the biggest VFX studios like ILM to create blockbusters such as Jurassic Park, Terminator 2, Titanic, Men in Black, Spawn, and The Fifth Element. It was also used to create amazing video games at the time, from the Japanese Resident Evil series, Silent Hill trilogy, Half-Life, The Legend of Zelda, Star Wars video games, and much more. Despite its success in the industry of video games and VFX for film, Softimage did not really find a home. Softimage has been passed around from company to company over the years like a CGI hot potato. It's as if they never knew what to do with this eccentric genius child. But from what we know about 3D programs that came and went over the years, Softimage probably was the most impressive, and like any 3D program no longer developed, Softimage's absence from the industry is sad. But when we evaluate what Softimage managed to accomplish while it was alive, it's hard not to be appreciative of how it went out.
The process for translating Yoji Shinkawa's visual designs into the XSI interpolated real-time 3D of the PS3's environment became rather involved, as complex textures and 3D models that Shinkawa drafted or molded by hand were fused together step by step with the team's digital rendering process. Maybe for the first time in the series, if not for the medium, character models in MGS4 in cutscenes used the same number polygons during gameplay. It sounds trivial, but in a very numerically real sense, this means that MGS4 will realize a dream that had dogged the series from the very start. It will be, in other words, at least to some degree, the quintessential playable movie, that futuristic form of virtual reality Hideo Kojima's games have aspired all along to become.
Uh-huh. Yes. I've taken care of it. Yes, I understand, but...
But this goes beyond sheer number of polygons per model. In MGS4 there will be separate complex systems governing facial animations and lip sync. With the latter, lip syncing, handled case by case across localizations, it was the facial animations expressing perhaps that universal human language inherent to all hearts and minds that would remain in every version of MGS4 across the world, one. To do this, Koji Pro used Soft Image XSI to build their own dev tools for automating as much of the early process of crafting emotive facial expressions as possible. Quote Autodesk's own technical deep dive, the case study of MGS4, the design template for the game called for a huge degree, quote, of advanced control. This led to a tool for the automatic creation of setups for facial rigs that were capable of such control. In their system, Koji Pro prepared face model data for the tool to automatically identify regarding optimum bone positions. The tool also created controls that included preset parameters for expressions such as laughing or angry faces, end quote. Though ostensibly designed for the PS3, and certainly, as we'll see, embodying its principle of parallelism, MGS4 would be developed also according to the broad principle of, quote, high quality at a lower resolution, end quote. Roughly, this involved creating maps from extremely high resolution models, overlaying layers, and filtering as much data out of the processing pipeline load as possible without harming the visual quality. Every time an asset or model undergoes compression, typically some data along the way gets lost. The image detail may suffer. But thanks to this high quality at low resolution systems-wide approach, Koji Pro ensure minimal compression loss and optimal data flow, all to keep MGS4 running smoothly, even at 60 frames per second in first-person mode. Though admittedly in practice, the finished product's performance will largely depend on the state and age of the player's PS3. It is with this specialized design environment, with Koji Pro's masterfully tactical approach to project management, workflow, and overall design, that MGS4 will be something that, as of its inception year 2005, remains all but unthinkable. A game with, in total, 9 hours of cinematic cutscenes. MGS4 will remain, even 13 years on, one of, if not still the single longest and most spectacular games to utilize real-time rendered movies. This was the medium process, real-time 3D rendering, that MGS1 had arguably first solidified as a mainstay of the modern home PC and console game. Fittingly, perhaps, the era MGS1 in 1998 began, MGS4 in 2008 will end.
All of these children were orphans. They work in arms factories. And when they grow up, they want to join a PMC. They seek revenge on other companies, PMCs that killed their parents, and use their earnings to support their younger siblings. There are countless child soldiers like these in the PMCs. Nowadays, anyone with a computer can get combat training. The FPS games that these children love are distributed for free by these companies. Of course, it's all just virtual training. It's so easy for them to get absorbed by these war games. And before they know it, they're in the PMCs holding real guns. These kids end up fighting in proxy wars that have nothing to do with their own lives. They think it's cool to fight like this. They think that combat is life. They don't need a reason to fight. After all, for them, it's only a game. Zero is the cause of all this. Defeating Liquid won't change things. Unless we stop the Patriot system, the cycle will go unbroken. Hop on.
If there's a single genre that defines the video game, it might be the first-person shooter. PC Magazine, 2017. Militainment, the emerging politics of the virtual citizen soldier, produced by the changing configurations of electronic media, social institutions, and world events. Gameplay mode, war, simulation, and technoculture by Patrick Krogan, 2011. The perfectionist, Kojima, will continue to make changes to the game right down to the wire, much to the shock and chagrin of the wider studio bearing his name. By the end of its development, MGS4 will become a true marvel of programming, writing, and design. Following 3 years of hibernation, Part reinterpretation, part original idea, MGS4 debuts worldwide June 2008. Five months later, Barack Obama will become President of the United States, supplanting the architects of the global war on terror, the Bush administration. Yet the spirit of that war, forged as it was in the flames and endless toxic fugue of the Manhattan incident, will live on, reinterpreted in terms of the new weapons, new technologies, but also new laws. From the actual battlefields dominated by English-speaking contractors around the globe, to the sci-fi near-future depictions found in big-budget modern video games like MGS4, one thing by 2008 remains clear. In the 21st century, whether in theory of simulation or in practice of reality, war has changed.
What the hell is that?
Snake, leave me and run.
Meryl.
I guess I am a rookie after all. Go on without me. This time, I'll protect you. Go. Destroy DW while there's still time. While I'm still alive.
Meryl.
Snake, the corridor ahead is full of microwaves.
Yeah. No way I'm getting through there uncooked. I'm sorry you got dragged into this.
This time, I've got your back. We'll meet again on the other side. Go! Hurry!
The Manhattan incident triggered a serious public backlash. Now the U.S. has to think twice before intervening militarily in other countries' affairs. This has fueled a push towards military privatization, with PMCs at the heart of that movement.
PMCs?
Since the events of September 2001, the United States has entered combat operations the world over. Not only in highly publicized battle zones like Iraq or Afghanistan, but also more quietly, behind the scenes, in places as far afield as Georgia, Haiti, Djibouti, Kenya, Ethiopia, Yemen, Somalia, Eritrea, and Liberia. Meanwhile, private mercenary companies, or PMCs, who've made a killing off this new global war on terror, literally, chief among them the most notorious PMC of all, Blackwater, stand at the forefront of another battlefield revolution, one built around a new kind of business, the business of privatized war, and the made-for-TV version it's known by, the global war on terrorism. The last battlefield revolution, beginning roughly 18 years before, with Gulf War I, had been the Revolution in Military Affairs, or RMA.
is reinterpret the old technology in terms of the new. Getting old isn't all that bad, you know. Let's get going, Snake.
On May 26th, the Roadrunner supercomputer, built by IBM with funding from the National Nuclear Security Administration for Los Alamos National Laboratory, achieved a long-sought supercomputing goal, performing more than 1,000 trillion operations per second, or petaflops. Roadrunner is a hybrid supercomputer, integrating a new cell-based processor, designed and built by IBM.
When you put the best tools, the best experimental facilities, the best computing facilities together with some of the smartest people, it's really an exciting place to be for doing science.
Soon, a caravan of moving vans will transport Roadrunner from IBM to Los Alamos, where it will be installed in the laboratory's Nicholas C. Metropolis Center for Modeling and Simulation. Coupled with programs designed to utilize its unprecedented performance, Roadrunner will foster scientific discovery in a diversity of fields, ranging from physical sciences to biology and medicine.
The PS3's Cell broadband engine works by writing to-do lists for the 8 subcores inside, which then execute those lists in parallel to each other simultaneously to emerge again as one process or continuity on the other end. MGS4 was, like every Metal Gear Solid, a game of many historic firsts. Among these was the use of subtle lens effects so that the lens could now get dirty, dusty, smudged, or wet. This, alongside the game's pseudo-handcam cinematography, which we'll discuss later on, brought players into the cutscenes as much as to the gameplay, thereby further solidifying the very thing that MGS as a series had all along been after: the fusion between story and gameplay, narrativity and interaction. The PS3 may have offered the most difficult game design environment ever. Utilizing its octet of chain-linked cores perfectly really could, in theory, lead to far superior games in every sense. But it would not be for years and years that even Sony's own developers, like Naughty Dog, would learn how to fully optimize their games for the PS3. And when most of the console's games wouldn't look or play all that better than on the rival Xbox 360 as a result, the PS3, with its challenging design environment, risked becoming another Sega CD or 3DO, expensive and largely irrelevant. It was in this too that MGS4 would follow the standard first established in the 90s by non-Metal Gear Kojima games, which typically wound up on transitory hardware, like the two consoles just mentioned. But more perhaps than any other of Kojima's games, MGS4 will be custom-made for and only for its native platform. As always for Metal Gear Solid, MGS4 required the creation of a wide array of proprietary in-house development tools. Through painstaking work on the absolute frontier of what could now be accomplished technologically, Koji Pro will be the first studio fully tap into this new Sony machine's potential. It will only be thanks to the PS3 and the Cell microprocessor's revolutionary design that MGS4 will be capable of the truly groundbreaking conceit of secret details, systems, and mechanics. We'll look at some examples of those soon.
The more tension you've accumulated, the more your psych gauge decreases.
But on this point, in a previous video, I discussed the importance for MGS4 and the PS3 of the concept of parallelism, Put simply, the cell represented a totally new approach to computer design, one that MGS4 will directly instantiate. We might conceptualize this wider paradigm as a parallel of digital fusion, as the fusion between the beauty of digital machines and the beast of systems modeled on and derived from living beings.
Now, if you're just tuning in, you must be thinking, these guys are crazy. What are they staring at that pile of seaweed for?
Sure is what I'm thinking.
Well, what you're actually looking at is an octopus.
And, as Kojima may be the one and only designer to realize, the PS3 also makes possible something that really every one of his games before now has only been able to attempt very meekly, indirectly, or by second-hand metaphor. A game design built from the inside out. One playing the player's physiology and mental states like a well-tempered synthesizer.
To make a weapon available for use, ready it by selecting weapons from the menu screen.
This we might dub the idea of the total game. And it's at the core of MGS4, this game of secret mechanics. But what those mechanics and subtle details beyond most players' notice are here for, however, we will only uncover by this video's end. Speaking of ends, it's entirely possible that the central premise presented by MGS4 to the world from the very start, namely of Snake's suicide, of themes like control, not only information control and battlefield control, but like taking control to erase your own existence, as punishment to absolve yourself of sins. All of this may have been inspired by an unlikely source, the 2007 biopic, Control. Ian Curtis, a legendary icon and pioneer of a whole generation of music called post-punk. The man suffered debilitating lifelong illnesses like epilepsy, which aged him before his time. Ian Curtis killed himself in 1980, forcing his band Joy Division to reform as a new group out of the ashes, to be named New Order. It may be a stretch, but given the importance that both bands have played for Kojima all across his life, and given the biopic about Curtis, Control, debuted during MGS4's development, given all that, combined with MGS4's wider context as Hideo's last hurrah, for MGS anyway, a self-imposed attempted annihilation of his own meme in the form of MGS and Solid Snake, it's at least possible that Kojima, inspired by the film about Curtis's life and death, Control, saw it also as his responsibility to figuratively kill himself. In his case, so that Kojima Productions and the Metal Gear series could, like Joy Division became New Order, move on beyond him to even greater things. To clear the way, by so doing, for future generations, for new games and new Metal Gears to come in his wake. But it had really been with MGS3 that the roots for MGS4, and particularly its secret or invisible mechanics, its unique marriage of story and gameplay, were all first planted. Both titles, Snake Eater and Guns of the Patriots, emerged from Kojima's realization that the pursuit of ever greater visual fidelity in video games of the 21st century was doomed by the law of diminishing returns. For this reasoned Kojima, games needed to grow in ways beyond mere visuals. The maestros, such as himself, now had to prove the worth of their storied legends in new ways, ones ever more subtle and all too commonly overlooked. What has apparently always interested Kojima the most about this medium isn't the visuals at all, fittingly enough. No, if we look back at his career going back to the MSX, it's been the interaction, and more importantly, the sense, the feeling on the inside, the experience of playthrough, that matters. This code phrase, sense, will be the kernel at the core of MGS4. Just as Gene had for MGS1, Meme for MGS2, and Scene for MGS3. Here we might also consider the Zen Buddhist notion of Satori, sense as in the mentality of a life as living and perceiving itself, to produce as Satori moments of total presence. But what made such aspirations of providing players a sense of total presence possible was the brain-like parallelized dynamics inside the PS3 and its Cell microprocessor, with its 8 different modular or parallel cores. Through them and their console, the PS3, with MGS4, Kojima will try to reassert the virtue that each of his games before now had in various ways extolled, being the irreducible value of the imperfect, of the human being in all our grand yet craven totality, body and soul, heart and mind, despite, if not because of, all its unmet ambitions, its half-remembered arrows of outrageous fortune, and every blood-borne flaw whose question of origin, whether by nature or nurture, had been a mainstay of Metal Gear all along. In this human finitude and frailty, and the wider juxtaposition it would strike against the cold, calculating inhumanity of AI and machines, MGS4 will certainly borrow from or comment on a litany of sci-fi influences, from Isaac Asimov and James Cameron to The Matrix and A Clockwork Orange. Metal Gear Solid 4 returned the series to its MGS roots, to portray not only the outer but the inner nature of the modern American military-industrial complex, and particularly for MGS4's case, how that complex gradually, if arguably, had merged with American society in general since the mid-60s setting of MGS3. Put simply, what almost no one ever acknowledges, talks about, or even seems to realize is that video game technology is military-born.
In the early 80s, DARPA began experimenting with video games as a form of combat simulation, resulting in something called SimNet, which allowed fledgling pilots to try their hand at flying a helicopter or an airplane. Then in 2002, America's Army was released as a recruitment tool, and it uses the same technology that powers games like Gears of War. And then finally last year, in a pull quote that makes me weep for humanity, a drone pilot told The Guardian that drone strikes were a lot like playing a video game.
If atom bombs and computers like MGS2 told us grew up together, so too did video games and techno-war, war waged almost exclusively by virtual means, in every sense of the word. Roughly, this techno-war paradigm traces back to a concept actually borrowed by the US military from Soviet state philosophers, the RMA. The RMA, which gave us the technology behind the original PlayStation, was built around the digital revolution and emerging technologies and disciplines such as cyber war, unmanned autonomous weapons, and total information awareness systems and protocols such as BOSS, or Battlefield Operating System. Even years later, by our year, 2021, DARPA and the US Army will still be trying to make the impossible dream of a fully integrated, fully seeable, controllable, cleaner, safer digital battlefield possible. But how exactly will any of this dystopian sci-fi and contemporary geopolitical commentary be brought to bear on previous entries as part of MGS4's wider objective to be the ultimate grand finale? The biggest topic that MGS4 tackled and most people missed was not about the military as a component of the American nation-state or wider American society, but about economics on a global scale. Here I refer to two prominent elements in MGS4, the use of so-called havens, and the biggest thing people might have missed, how MGS4 draws a line between the mutually assured destruction of the nuclearized 1950s and the endless wars and rampant gun violence and war profiteering, American-based corporations, and behind them 21st century neoliberal capitalism in general, has shifted away from the 19th and 20th century paradigms of nationalism entirely to give rise to a world without not only war in any conventional sense, but without also borders. MGS4 was in many, if not almost every respect, a kind of response to the Call of Duty craze that Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare had helped really kick off. But in MGS4, arguably, gameplay was more plausibly connected to real, actual Modern Warfare doctrines. If Call of Duty was to some degree the propagandistic fantasy enshrined in that recruitment slogan, Army of One, MGS4 embodied the battlefield doctrine behind the command style of each new soldier in the War on Terror, namely full spectrum dominance. A full analysis of US military doctrinal shifts since the end of the Cold War is of course beyond the remit of this virtual essay. But suffice to say, the concept full spectrum dominance is on display simply in how much more MGS4 emphasizes what we might call the flow or order of battle. While a more traditional FPS team deathmatch style campaign plays out across MGS4's various war-strewn acts, these are not conflicts involving the player directly. Instead, in a brilliant showcase of what I've been trying to impart about how MGS4 revolutionized storytelling through gameplay, each of these battles to comment on both the machine-like logic of the modern FPS, but also the modern techno-war, plays out as an AI against AI simulation, a mere war game. By simply affecting the flow of battle here or there, the entire course will change. By doing so, MGS4 emphasizes it is not by individual soldiers a battle is won or lost, nor for or against, but rather according to who better masters control over the so-called battle space. The US Department of Defense defines battle space as, quote, the environment, factors, and conditions that must be understood to successfully apply combat power, protect the force, or complete the mission. This includes the air, land, sea, space, and the included enemy and friendly forces, facilities, weather, terrain, the electromagnetic spectrum, and the information environment within the operations area and areas of interest. See also electromagnetic spectrum, information environment, joint intelligence preparation of the battle space. End quote. The battle space and the flow of battle would be ideas at the heart of MGS4, as much as the revolution in military affairs, all both in terms of story and gameplay. But MGS4 would begin a Kojima trademark of not only marrying storytelling with gameplay in new ways, but also reflecting the essence, the feeling or inner sensation of his storytelling and his world building through gameplay and even cinematic presentation style, too. Outside the centrality of the main story, MGS4 is actually a toy box of unbelievable possible variety, wherein Snake could affect the flow of battle and exercise full spectrum dominance in ways that no other military action title of the era could dream of. That's because as Snake, you won't be just another soldier fighting on a self-enclosed battlefield of one. In MGS4, as Old Snake, you're a neutral third party who can fight or sneak as much as you, for whatever reason, will. And in some sections, like the opening of Act 2 and most of Act 3, Snake could now use that power to control the flow of battle, to steer tactical stealth operations from afar, as a group, as a kind of parallel unit. Thinking in these scenarios as almost a kind of team, Snake controls the battle space to help NPCs sneak through them, or gain ground from which to better attack your mutual enemy, PMC, Private Military Company. of which there are at least 5 throughout the game. The start of Act 2, possibly the best example of this group, stealth, and combat dynamic, can play out across lots of different ways, depending on how much you intervene and when and where the PMC notice the militia. Every gun had different stats, not only weight, range, power, CQC compatibility, and firing modes, but also damage, penetration, stability, reload speed, shock or force of impact, and range of auto-lock for players less familiar with FPSs. In addition, MGS4 also added a detailed system for certain weapons to be customized, enabling players to add at will bells and whistles like flashlights, stabilizing grips, infrared sights and scopes, suppressors, and also attachments like shotguns or grenade launchers. And that's still leaving out the different types of ammo that many of the different weapons could use. Getting the Big Boss emblem in MGS4 was a serious challenge, making the game probably the hardest to fully master of the series. But fortunately, a ton of new Game Plus items and incentives would bring players back multiple times, true to Kojima's arcade roots. Snake now had to worry about a bad back and blows to morale in the form not only of hunger, but now stress. We'd seen Snake infiltrate and work his way through a litany of difficult survival environments, but now he was up against one of the most difficult things of all, the times. Age, human frailty. But the most powerful case of subversion and evolution has to be Act 4, the return to Shadow Moses that I mentioned before. Something like this has never been done before. We're brought back to the setting of MGS1, but precisely to enact the opposite of a return. The further and further we go into this Shadow Moses, the further and further away we seem to move emotionally from the original, bringing across beautifully the theme that what the wages of time take can never be brought nor bought back. That's exactly, when you think about it, what separates us from machines. A lived concept of time, an inner world of senses that isn't exactly the same today as it was yesterday. Act 4 showcases that not even our own memories stay the same.
Snake, I think maybe your memory... Don't worry, I'm sure I can remember it.
Or continue to map with what, like words, they refer to as their proxy. This Shadow Moses, the same in name only, is different. The reality, it seems, is no match for the legend. Campbell calls it Liquid Snake's monument, a rather apt description for what is, at bottom, a graveyard. Broadly speaking, MGS4 would derive much of its plot from the ID systems and information age concerns first introduced by MGS2. These would be combined by Guns of the Patriots with the grand, sweeping, military, cinematic epic foundations of MGS3. And there would be economics, perhaps, derived from systems seen in Boktai. Back in Kojima's adventure games, Snatcher, and in particular Policenauts, the player had to be constantly searching for any subtle clue or detail in their environment. The way those games worked was compensating for limitations in terms of graphical fidelity via world-building science fiction, which gave them dimensions beyond the naked eye alone, even if these were actualized purely, usually, by text. MGS4 will combine this long-standing sci-fi tradition with the MGS series, so known for its real-time action and higher budget, and centrality of stealth, all to get Guns of the Patriots' unifying motif of secret or hidden details and mechanics. The result will be, as always, a hybrid of Eastern and Western design philosophies. One coursing with dramatic emotion and laden with details that most players wouldn't see. Among these many secret details are the many veiled allusions to prior Kojima games, including considerable ones to Snatcher and Policenauts. How form matched with content in revolutionary ways proved hard to see, much as the Cell proved hard to market, simply from how far down its own rabbit hole that MGS4 was operating. Typically, before 2008, gameplay and story were usually kept somewhat separate. That way, players uninterested in any linear game narrative elements could just focus on play. But beginning with Metal Gear Solid 2, Kojima's productions increasingly began to merge the two, story and gameplay, entirely, so that by Guns of the Patriots, players really had no choice, perhaps, in the end, but to take or leave the game as a whole. MGS4's unique structure and design style make ignoring completely one or the other, story or gameplay, impossible, at least past a certain point. Many story elements, too, seem inexplicable without the context of MGS4's game design. And even then, a full and accurate memory of every prior Metal Gear title was also greatly needed, too. The first obstacle to MGS4's success is probably here. It's written, far more so than maybe any, not only MGS, but any game before it, as something only a game ever could be. What the game's investment in questions of canon and lore and completing the Metal Gear saga obscure is how unsuited MGS4 really is to standards derived from older other narrative forms, like movies or books. It can only properly then, I'd argue, be evaluated for what it is, a game. Some specifics here might help. Take the central mechanic in MGS4, the war economy, and Drebin's virtual marketplace. In each battlefield we enter in MGS4, we're explicitly given no real reason to fight or not to fight. We're a neutral third party. But that's exactly the state of military affairs MGS4's story derives from. We only engage in combat in these sections to play the game. The new game that's become not just of Metal Gear, but its world of warfare, where proxy armies kill each other for no real cause, no reason except to play the game, in accordance to the precepts and the logic of its all-consuming, infernal, and inhuman AI World War machine. This machine and its game's totalitarian aspects become all the more clear as we, having no real choice in MGS4, must clasp ourselves in the system's irons, all in the name of convenience, liberty, progress, and prosperity. That MGS4 finds systemic ways to express these narrative ideas is nothing short of groundbreaking. There will be, following the practical stunts and action choreography of the Twin Snakes in MGS3, more of an influence played on MGS4 by martial arts movies and action cinematography. But MGS4 will revolutionize, as I hinted, a bold new visual storytelling style for Kojima, one which would grow so detailed and complex that some scenes wouldn't be blocked by actors, but by utilizing a kind of stop-motion-like technique, no longer using MGS 1 or 2's Legos, but dolls. Further, MGS4 will also use its central concern and setting of the Patriots AI system and their New World War to somewhat blur the lines and remove the hard borders formerly dividing our own player character's mind and that of NPCs. Back in MGS2, an Easter egg enabled players to respond as our character's thoughts in real time with an affirmative or negative during codec calls. But now in MGS4, it was other people's thoughts, which sometimes forced their way inside our heads.
My mask. Put it back on. Okay. Like this. Other people's thoughts force their way into my mind. Before I die, I want to be by myself. I want to be left alone in my own world.
Perhaps a fitting nod to the secret source of the Patriots control system, the ghost of Psycho Mantis.
All that's left is Mantis. But you should know, Snake, she's been controlling all the other beasts. She's the beast of beasts. Don't let her get her hooks in you.
I won't.
See you around, Snake.
And that brings up something Kojima would make a tradition for all his games, starting with MGS4. One that had its roots even in his earliest titles, Snatcher and the first Metal Gear. I refer to the secret explanations behind events in his games, which awaited only the most observant players' notice. These things would often tie things up behind the scenes without coming out and spelling themselves out for you explicitly. In MGS4's case, this was the way a mental copy of MGS1's iconic fourth wall breaking psychic, Psycho Mantis, secretly powered the entire so-called SOP system, evident in the puppet strings we sometimes can vaguely see, and lots of other clues besides, like the role of the syringe in our boss fight against Mantis.
Your skills have improved, or rather, your hardware.
For the first real time since the first hints with MGS2, Kojima's sci-fi is playing off the game's platform to feel itself as a game in formal terms, like something right out of a sci-fi movie. This is really where the parallelism paradigm comes into play, I suppose.
That code is then blocked and can never again be used to access the system. So, if you're going to use a substitute, you need to find a new genetic access code with each new trial.
Because the more realistically that MGS4 can prime, prompt, suggest, or otherwise control our every action, if not thought, the more comprehensively the game is making its point that we now live in an age, to quote the kernel AI from MGS2, where everything can now be quantified, where no experience is not at least theoretically possible to render as a digital snapshot or facsimile, where all sorts of information and systems processing can now more directly and intently than ever happen with total precision and control.
Otacon, you and Drebin both mentioned something about a war price earlier. What did you mean by that?
It's a kind of market price, one that fluctuates according to demand, not only for PMCs and military industry, but for the production, distribution, and energy supply networks that support them. It's been growing by leaps and bounds, and investors are really starting to take notice. As the fighting in any given area becomes increasingly intense and prolonged, the war price goes up. No doubt Drebin's rates are linked to that war price. The longer and bloodier a battle becomes, the higher service prices are going to get. To put it another way, the quieter things are, the better the bargains.
The PS3's Blu-ray disc, rival to the HD DVD format of the Xbox 360, could hold a far greater amount of data. Even so, yet again, the team found itself struggling to keep MGS4 within its limits. As a result, Japanese audio will not make it onto Western copies, and an untold number of cuts and further compression will also have to occur. Not only is the PS3's unique architecture a technical nightmare as a dev environment, but the game's wider emphasis on invisible, stealthy, and secret systems will require much more precision, more attention to detail than ever before. But here we'll have to revisit the formal paradigm coined by Kojima's production team during work on Snatcher and Policenauts, the multi-process story. In the multi-process story, the big picture stays unchangingly and cinematically linear, while the moment-to-moment minutiae of interaction is freed up to split off in all directions, reflecting the player's own predilections and personality along the way, without giving him complete control of the story's outcome. Born out of the adventure game norms of the late 20th century, the multi-process story explains the raw structure of virtually every Hideo Kojima game, including, of course, MGS 1 through 3. MGS 1 through 3 as multi-process stories had been born as brothers, each with complementary designs. But because of the PS3's uniqueness, no previous method of creating the multi-process story, or of digitally fusing together story and gameplay, techniques that had made Kojima Productions famous to begin with, would work. As Otacon will say in MGS4 itself directly, the old technology, the old design concepts and storylines even, would have to be reinterpreted for MGS4 in terms of the new. MGS4 brought the multi-process story into the 21st century, perhaps for the first time. Let's explore. The game will be filled with more possible branching paths and reactive player-driven feedback loops than ever, and it would all get cunningly concealed behind the game's subtle attention to detail, to so-called invisible, secret, or hidden mechanics. Not only was every single act full of hidden areas and emergent events, there were even secret NPC conversations.
Those four ugly sons of bitches? Sir, their appearance may be strange, but they demonstrated incredible combat ability.
Scores of hidden weapons, MP3 files, and items that were all only obtainable in a variety of obscure ways, like, for example, trading with a gorilla or holding up a member of the regional PMC. Or putting in a secret code.
Snake, I think maybe your memory...
MGS4 attempted to create what I've called secret mechanics, chief among them the psych meter.
Ooh, what are you doing here? Come on, you can do it!
The battlefield effects of your game's war economy markets, busts, and booms, and the interactive Easter egg flashbacks, many of which being well off the beaten path. Every Metal Gear, if not every game, period, has derived from conditionals. If complete X, then unlock Y.
Otacon, have you ever seen a sniper rifle anywhere on this base?
A sniper rifle?
Meryl's been shot by an extremely good sniper.
Sniper?
A high-quality sniper rifle is the only way I can fight back.
I saw a PSG-1 in the armory in the second-floor basement of the tank hangar.
The second-floor basement of the tank hangar? I have to go all the way back there?
Well, yeah.
What's wrong with you, Otacon?
Nothing.
That kind of thing. I'm just talking basics here. Forget computer science. There's just the rudiments of ludonarrative design. If you just sit there and do nothing, then no game can take place. With me? But while every Kojima game before now has made extensive use of conditionals, you might say the real idea of the multi-process story paradigm, first devised by Kojima and his team with Police Knots, is simply the radical idea of making conditionals in a game that are neither epiphenomenal nor mandatory. What I mean is, you don't have to perform every possible action, and yet no action possible will feel pointless or irrelevant to the player's journey throughout the game. It'll be the player's own version of that game as a result, at least in theory, by the end.
Here. Don't have to twist my arm. Thanks.
In the past, I've referred to this post-conditional style of Hideo Kojima games as the tactic of multiple realizability. Taken from philosophy of science, the phrase multiple realizability just means something's effectively modular. It's a job with multiple different possible ways to realize. Sandbox game design is probably the clearest sense of multiple realizability because the very definition of the sandbox game concept is, well, giving players a variety of unique, yet equally valid ways to realize the same ultimate end goal. But what's rarely appreciated, I claim, is that Hideo Kojima games have been experimenting with multiple realizability since the very beginning, and in ways far advanced, you might say, from merely questions of raw underlying game style. Kojima's central conceits, like the multi-process story and digital fusion, are both ideas about how to reconcile multiple realizability in terms of gameplay with the inherent director-driven linearity of a traditional cinematic experience.
I'll let you decide the best COA. I'm counting on you, Snake.
A surveillance camera?
Security cameras? Duh.
We've seen the answer during the adventure game days was the multi-process story of leaving the big picture narrative elements linear and making the moment-to-moment gameplay full of tiny possible variations that could play out in narrative voice just as seamlessly, so that the illusion not of just playing a game or just watching a movie, but of experiencing for the first time the digital fusion of the two of them, that illusion never got broken. Perhaps as his last hurrah, MGS4 was designed to be the epitome of the Hideo Kojima game. And the examples of the multi-process story and digital fusion are everywhere. In a nice surprise, we're told that if we use the syringe too much, there will be very negative health consequences. We find out what those will be during the boss fight with Screaming Mantis, where if we've used the syringe too much, Snake will just vomit constantly throughout the encounter. In the ending scene in the hallway, you're literally Snake's heart, beating away furiously to keep him within a hair's breadth on the very edge of life and death. It's one of the most powerful interactive sequences in all of gaming I personally have yet to see topped. I could make a whole video just on the genius of the New Game Plus modes and how that corresponds to the war economy systems, and how this provides the Metal Gear series with an impetus to continue playing and replaying, the very impetus that the series, since at least MGS1, had been searching for. I could also spend a lot of time just talking about Old Snake as what I would call the final protagonist, not only for this series, but in some ways the medium, the protagonist that the games industry has since 2008, from which has never really moved forward. You could argue that games today have still yet to evolve past this character archetype, first perhaps presented by Old Snake. From today's Kratos to Joel to Arthur Morgan, all we really find since MGS4 are debatably variations on its original theme. However, you could also argue that this has become now more of a worship or reveling in death for cheap dramatic effect as yet another industrialized game trend, leaving behind the crucial both context and substance of Old Snake himself. But all that is for another time. As you might imagine, designing features or mechanics that aren't mandatory to progress
This is hilarious!
that are in effect secret mechanics.
By the way, Snake, that outfit is really killing your camo index. Unless you want the enemy to see you, I suggest you change your clothes as...
Why?
Why? Because his camo index is...
Camo index, schmamo index.
Hold on now.
He's wearing the Gakko suit.
Why?
Because it looks cute.
Snake, talk some sense into her.
What's wrong with being cute?
Am I the only normal person around here?
Well, the multi-process story takes a ton of time and ultimately, particularly with MGS4, becomes a thankless task. What makes the game's medium singular today is how intimate and intense that it can be for you and you alone, the one playing it. Using interaction to, like the multi-process story, enable multiple possible paths forward so that when we, the players, ultimately decide, the one you pick, whatever it is, will still be you. Part and extension of you. You by proxy. While at the same time, like any movie or album. Yeah, it's the both outer and inner dimensions to games that By virtue of interaction and other unique features, including nonlinearity and customizability, just to name two, this commercial art form stands alone as the one defining cultural mode for the early 21st century. But the problem is that inner part. The broad points of this game, what happens in it and what it's all about, that may be public information, but the inside world, the sense of experiencing, playing MGS4, is decidedly architecturally closed, no less so than its literal design. Its precise contours and specifications are proprietary, you could say, in the sense that they belong to you and only you, in the sense that they are not conveyable by you, not fully, to anyone else. Though on the surface cookie cutter and identical, each so-called B&B core boss fight conceals many subtleties of some form or another, and really drive home collectively the game's underlying moral gravity, as were shown firsthand the dehumanizing, if not alluring, industrialization that the wider game portrays while colonizing its final frontier, the human heart and mind. But the B&B unit also drive home the normalization of war in this game's fictitious version of America, how it's commodified by fusing together Eros and Thanatos, sex and death, lust and terror. As a fitting extension of MGS4's dystopian sci-fi panopticon, its wider sense of almost societal schizophrenia, each B&B character model performed their scene in the nude. There's no detail, no matter how secret or private, you see, this Orwellian thought police-like system depicted in the game does not see.
She believes she can find the answers inside a machine hooked up to the world. She spends every day inside the net, exploring. For Sonny, this is home.
No, it shouldn't be like that.
What?
It's time you let her go outside.
What are you talking about?
She hasn't even been born yet.
One of the biggest things people might have missed about the B&B core, though, is how they embodied the whole concept of war becoming routine, of Metal Gear Solid becoming routine. You might say that the B&B core represent the type of Metal Gear Solid that MGS4, as Kojima's last, is meant to teach the coming generation of new Metal Gear developers not to make.
They did it again. In the end, they're no more than a program. Oh, all they can do is repeat the same pattern over and over again.
Each of the B&B core members' names is a mere repetition of a boss name from MGS1, albeit in slightly different form.
You, Psycho Mantis.
No, that was another me.
And each of the boss fights, subtly but crucially, represents another kind of hybrid or chimera, combining memories we have throughout the series.
That's good, Snake. Hurry up and catch me.
生きることへの憤怒だ。
Nothing more than iterations of the same oppressively uniform system.
Big Boss, now a vegetable, became a prisoner of Zero even in death. He's trapped for eternity in a brain-dead prison. To bind himself to his friend, to ensure his rule over the world, Zero transformed Big Boss into an icon, neither living nor dead.
Sounds almost like a religion.
Naturally.
By putting them at rest, we're shown by Kojima that some things really should be left to die.
Kill me. Kill me now.
And that going on endlessly, repeating yourself, can be a fate in some ways worse than death. These beauties become beasts without selves that exist merely as reformations of the system's own memories and traumas. These beauties, deprived of names or even words of their own sane mind's cognition, are the epitome of the neo-totalitarianism that Old Snake sets out to ultimately fight and MGS4 ultimately sets out to convey. The subject of PTSD and endless nightmare traumas lie at MGS4's heart, and that with the B&B unit is on full display. It is a world traumatized by the events of the Metal Gear saga, not to mention real history. It is a world where the series becomes a kind of emblematic metaphor for that sense or essence that leaves when the body dies, and yet that continues to haunt the living by virtue precisely of its absence. Yes, presence via the proxy of absence, speaking through the absence of sound. These boundary-breaking new ludonarrative styles and ideas are what make MGS4 as brilliantly ahead of its time as it is, much like its follow-up, 2015's The Phantom Pain, typically misunderstood. MGS4 remains not in spite of, but because of its uniqueness, a vitally important triumph in the wider story of the medium's evolution, both by how MGS4 confronts the medium's militarized past and present, but also how its radical medium specificity, its radical reinventions, paved the way for many new possible futures. That dramatic monologue that we saw Snake deliver in the very first trailer would be performed in MGS4 exactly the same, as already apparent by the game's title screen sequence, which would play out until you loaded your game. But this would prove to be a fake-out suicide sequence, even if the inevitability of Snake's death by that 2005 trailer preordained was still implied to take place shortly after the events of this game. This all used the dynamic relationship of Kojima's between trailers and the final game, as well as MGS4's central theme of completing the circle, of ending at the beginning, all to convey what may be Kojima's favorite theme, fate.
And what we are seeing is not the war in Iraq. What we're seeing are slices of the war in Iraq. We're seeing that particularized perspective that reporter or that commentator or that television camera happens to be able to see at that moment. And it is not what's taking place what you see is taking place, to be sure, but it is one slice, and it is the totality of that that is what this war is about and being made up of.
There are just so many secret mechanics operating in MGS4 under the hood. Again, many of them completely missed by many players.
Opportunity to slip through.
Not a lot of people know you can play most of MGS4 in first person, or do action rolls to the side, or use Metal Gear Mark II to make a noise, or barter with militias. The list of secret mechanics and features in this game, it just goes on and on. We could probably spend a whole video just on visual secrets alone, like how the enemy unit, the frogs, resemble little Metal Gear rays, or how we can literally see the lineage from Metal Gear Solid 1's Rex to MGS4's geckos, or how these wolves are most likely the same ones or related to the ones that, of course, we saw in MGS1. Maybe now some of them then pups, now grown up. Take a look at all the things happening in parallel during this briefing cutscene as another example. Making the environment a kind of extension or model of narrativity expressed through space is something Kojima's been experimenting with since the days of Policenauts, like during that game's very opening scenario. Many, if not each scene in this game resemble finely made ornate clockwork, scenes where blink and you'll miss it. It's crucial to note how much of a departure this broad conceit represents from cinema or any non-interactive linear visual medium. The economy of cinema, if you will, is the real estate of its screen. Directors must think carefully about things like line of sight and frame pacing and other factors, because their stories are told, in the words of Jean-Luc Godard, in 24 lies per second, as a linear sequence of still images. Godard's Breathless, for example, has no New Game Plus. Games like MGS4, though, unlike movies like Breathless, have a completely different medium within which to play. All the invisible or secret mechanics and details in MGS4, the ones that happen too quickly, subtly, or quietly for us to notice, maybe the first time, maybe ever, reflect the importance for Kojima, really throughout his whole career, of what is sometimes called medium specificity. In other words, making games as only games could be. It may be in this regard, MGS4 will find its greatest successes. The entirety of Act 4, The Return to Shadow Moses, which we talked about, is a manifestation, notice, of the most central of MGS4's ideas, and expressed in spatial form, diorama style, as we literally return to the place it all started to bring this story to its end. More and more, beginning with MGS2, Kojima's Metal Gears have attempted to use story and game design directly to teach the future the series' soul, its most basic principles, tribulations, and traditions. All the lessons a decade of directing Metal Gear has to teach. I'd argue that MGS4 is Kojima's way to fall moment, referring to the licensed track by the band Star Sailor used at the end of MGS3. In this increasingly meta phase of Metal Gear Solid, the same lessons the boss had to teach Big Boss, who in turn will pass them on to Solid, aka Old Snake, by MGS4's end, these same lessons, the same sense of disillusionment with the grim reality behind the meme of being a living legend, it's all also, arguably, Kojima's attempt at parting wisdom for whoever it is that will inevitably follow him as series director. The struggle of Old Snake to finish his mission and honor his commitments, the ravages of time, the pain of ages, the sudden vanishing of his youth and obsolescence of his very being. Snake's mission far, far more than ever before, with MGS4 doubled as some kind of half-poem, half-document, describing Kojima's own struggles, directing, I claim, these games. But it all comes back to the question of secret mechanics and MGS4's operative code phrase, sense. The reason MGS4 is designed so obscurely isn't to outsmart the audience or lord over us Kojima's brilliance. It's to embody the theme of life being a series of events only truly known by you and you alone, as the only one living it. The way this syncs back with my claim of MGS4 being Kojima's cenotaph is simple. MGS4's themes, concurrent parallelized programming, and all-around design serve to warn the next generation, whether players or future Metal Gear creators alike, that no matter how vainly and valiantly you struggle, that you rage, cry, laugh, and scream against the dying of the light, there will still be parts of you that won't outlive, that can never be passed down, that can only pass on. To make Metal Gear, this may suggest, is become a legend. Live to see that legend go obsolete, and then watch as the meaning of all you've done gets further and further lost in a digital dissolve. The resolve to keep on fighting to overcome all obstacles, least of all the obstacle of your own self, your own frail, evanescent temporariness, own emotional baggage and mental strain and stress from the day-to-day battles, the battles you'll have to fight more and more frantically just to keep up with the exponentially evolving, technologically driven, neo-dystopian times. All this, MGS4 warns, will be part of what it means to assume control over these games. If, that is, there's even anyone after Kojima willing and able to do so the way he once did. As a result of all this, MGS4 is not only one of the most labored over, detail-driven, and secretive Metal Gear games, it may also be one of Kojima's most fourth-wall-breakingly personal. Game systems and mechanics or features generally kept heretofore outside the specific player journey and kept instead part of menu-level, non-diegetic game design became included in Guns of the Patriots' core underlying gameplay loop, so that, for example, selecting a song is now done by using and equipping an actual item, which you can't use while using a second item at the same time. Or so that, as another example, the radar is actually caused by an equipped item, the solid eye, one that is reactive to your overall level of psych. Guns of the Patriots will be a secretly brilliant attempt to navigate the quote-unquote reality of the post-real 21st century information society. Shadows and specters will hang over the entire game of not only colonialism, but also the industrial revolutions. But aside from all this wider historical and political commentary, of course, MGS4 would be laden with references and relevancy to prior Metal Gear entries. Act 1 of the game, for example, is rather similar to Virtuous Mission or the Tanker chapter from MGS3 and 2 respectively. And like in MGS3's War of Attrition, again in MGS4 you played the long game against your foes, harming the PMC's defenses, for example, prior to you infiltrating in Act 2. Instead of completely bridging games like MGS2 had with MGS1 or MGS3 had to the entire series, MGS4 would perhaps play on precisely what between the years had been altered, broken, gotten erased, or lost. The making of Featurette would tell us that one crucial word behind the game is dissolve, or in the words of a certain Captain Ahab, that brimming life that is gulped and gone. Even if Snake's tale doubled as the final, self-annihilating mission of someone terminally ill, in a beautiful, last-minute signature fake-out, Kojima gives his old character a reprieve, some time for himself, and as a man, a snake no longer. This seems like a hopeful fantasy, a glimpse of how Kojima, post-MGS, might be left his freedom by the end. But even if the legend of Solid Snake ends on a relatively upbeat note, on a life-affirming note, in any rate, as a callback to MGS 1 and 2, as we'll see in a future episode, the legend of Hideo Kojima and the man behind that myth would not be granted any such mercy. MGS4 wasn't, by the end, about self-annihilation at all. Not exactly. It's about willfully allowing some things to die in their own time, and in the process obtain no death, but one better, a kind of evolution as one possible self dissolves, becoming another. As we'll soon discover, the topic of death and dying as a necessary element to living a true and full life, and what happens when the death and dying cycle gives way to the immortality of the undead. All these themes will become only more and more prominent for Hideo Kojima games. In a world, the world that MGS4 satirizes and depicts, where everything is monitored, rendered visible, kept under control, and subjected to the norms of neoliberal democratic open information societies, while the invisible plane of the mind and senses is thereby left to rot in secret, MGS4 represents a sort of conceptual haven outside the system's reach. Whatever happens in there, it's almost like a black box, or at least it is to everyone who isn't you. The multiprocess story with MGS4 achieved its final form, becoming a game that we can't openly communicate about with wider society past a very narrow point. A game whose existence as we perceive it depends for its existence on that perception itself, whatever form it takes for you. Your MGS4 is yours and yours alone. A co-byproduct as much of Koji Pro or the PS3 as of your own senses. For this reason that MGS4, your MGS4, dies when you do. Some things, you see, were not meant to be passed down.